Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain on this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, as there really is a lot of news and information to get to before I may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, ladies and gentlemen, one of the things that we've seen come to the epicenter with respect to this fast-paced modern American society in which we live today is this notion that our ivory towers of academia from coast to coast and border to border in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours has been attempting to indoctrinate the up-and-coming generations. And this is something that is a major shift from the way that academia used to be. There was a time in our relatively brief yet illustrious history here on the face of God's green earth that our university campuses promoted the idea of an individual learning to become a well-rounded individual who could basically, this individual student would have the ability to think for him or herself, to analyze the evidence under the totality of the circumstances and to form his or her own opinion. However, during the countercultural revolution that started a half-century ago in the 1960s, this impetus and driving force of mainstream higher learning began to change drastically, permanently, and dare I say, irreparably. Basically, what they began to do is to strip away the focus on the individual and replace it with the twin cancerous doctrines of which we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have declared total war upon, that of moral relativism and political correctness, so that identity politics would become the mainstay of our system of education. That is something that has been dominating the ivory towers of our universities and our institutions of higher learning for generation after successive generation now. And unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, it shows no signs of improving within the foreseeable future. You see, the leftists, during the time of the countercultural so-called revolution, those who were inspired by the architect of the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist Bible, that of, Rules for Radicals, that chief architect of it being Saul Alinsky, they saw this as a golden opportunity to change the way that American academia and education worked forevermore. They saw this as a way to interject social engineering into the curricula of our various universities. And in fact, this is what the great visionary Zygmunt Dobbs warned us of in his magnum opus of Keynes at Harvard back in the 1950s and 60s, that these nefarious, frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists and their allies in the historical revisionists, and now, of course, the Common Core standard bearers of education, were doing everything in their power to dumb down the up-and-coming generations in the land of the free and the home of the brave. And of course, the nefarious and twisted, and dare I say, diabolical reason behind this was they saw it as a way to transform the way that American citizens identified themselves. You can eventually drown out the traditional notions, the traditional national heritage, character, spirit, but above all, identity in these United States of America by espousing this sort of drivel that has no connotation or connection with reality. That is exactly what the historical revisionists have been attempting to do for well over a half-century now. And I know that I've discussed the Dewey education system back on previous solo flight special editions of our state-of-the-art radio program, but this is a continuation of that. And so when we look at the campuses in the United States, all across this great land of ours, we don't see a fertile land in which the up and coming generations are being taught their civic duties and obligations and the proper connotations of our relatively brief yet illustrious history here on the face of God's green earth. No, they are being taught this drivel. This drivel that is based in identity politics, which is all part of cultural Marxism, which, as you recall, got its start in the interwar periods. In other words, in the periods between World War I and World War II in Frankfurt, Germany. The Frankfurt School is essentially where the frothing of the mouth Fabian socialist leftists decided that the way to truly bring about change in our ivory towers of academia was to embrace this notion of cultural Marxism. Now, doesn't that sound bizarre? Marx was essentially putting forth an economic philosophy, one of the most wicked and decrepit forms to have ever been conjured up by the imagination of man throughout the entire course of human events. But to tie it to culture is something different. It lends itself to the incrementalization that the frothing of the mouth Fabian socialist leftists have championed for over a century and a half now, and it gave them a way to get into the upper echelons of polite society. For you see, if you can control the curriculum of the various institutions of higher learning in wherever you are attempting to forcefully place your dark and twisted ideology against the will of the people, then you can control the narrative. And remember that one of the things that my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, and our first Air Marshal, Mr. Nelson Ward, and indeed yours truly, has oft-times reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, it is that in systems of polity, that is our political system, and the future of nations, perception oft-times matters more than reality itself. And the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists, learned this lesson very early on. And they have been exceptionally masterful at their attempts to gut the way that we view our own ascendance in history. They have tried to teach us to be ashamed of the, let's face it, the magnificent accomplishments that this thriving and flourishing at one time representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours achieved in a snap of the fingers. Because relatively speaking, the United States of America rose to such lofty heights in a very brief time. What essentially was a flash in the pan of history. And again, this is something that the frothing of the mouth Fabian socialist leftists realized that they had to denigrate. They had to tear it down. Because if they didn't, they would not be able to basically sink their claws into the societal fabric of the land of the free and the home of the brave, and that they would be rejected wholesale. And the reason that they would be rejected wholesale is that they know that they cannot compete in the free marketplace of ideas because their dark and twisted machinations, ideology, and if it can even be called philosophy, then we'll be kind here and refer to it as a philosophy, would be rejected wholesale because it would be theft by any other name. Now, who wants to embrace theft? Who wants to embrace thievery? That's not a laudable thing to choose. And if we recall the sagacious advice of that brilliant founding father, Samuel Adams, and I'm going to paraphrase him here, as I oftentimes have done so here at the Wright Flyer, in order for the United States to be a strong, robust, and vibrant republic, it is absolutely necessary for the people to be a virtuous people. We are a virtuous republic, and therefore we do have a high set of morality, a high code and high set of standards of morality. And unfortunately, these frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists and their allies in the historical revisionists and the Common Core standard bearers of disinformation are doing everything they can to replace that system of morals and our well-established societal mores with the twin cancerous doctrines of political correctness and moral relativism. In other words, they want there to be winners and losers, and they want to change the impetus and the driving force of education away from being the enlightenment of the individual. Because if you remember, what a classical liberal arts education was all about was creating a well-rounded individual. A student that was educated in the fine arts as well as the sciences, so that they would be able to engage upon whatever endeavor that they set their minds to. That was the original purpose of education. But Dewey wanted to change that. Dewey, during the turn of the 20th century, did everything in his power to make it about a collective system. And it is this mental collectivization that has really come to a head in the land of the free and the home of the brave, because it's taking away the whole notion that we can think for ourselves, and therefore we should hold individuals accountable for their own words, deeds, and actions. Instead, we now get into identity politics, one of the favorite weapons utilized by the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists in order to hoist their, let's face it, criminal ideology down the throats of the American people and completely against their will. Now, that is not something that we should tolerate, nor is it something that has a place in an open, honest, but above all free society like that of these United States of America. But they don't care. You see, this is where the idea of changing and tinkering with the history of the United States that had been well established, indeed well documented, to try and paint our founding fathers as these wicked men who were rich, white, oppressive, slave-holding males. Yes, slavery was an evil, and it can properly be deemed or termed as America's original sin. But it was certainly not an exclusivity to the United States. It was not something that was exclusively American. Great Britain had started slavery. Remember that the 13 colonies were considered the territorial property of the Empire of Great Britain until the Paris Peace Accord was signed. But they don't discuss that, other than in this general approach that modern history has of attempting to paint Western culture and civilization as this thieving, disease-spreading blight on the course of human events. Yet nothing could be further from the truth. The push for scientific knowledge, yes, in China they had it. Yes, in some of the other Asian countries they had it. But where it really started to dominate in the age of exploration was when the West decided to try and find new discoveries. That is the type of inquisitiveness that is quintessential to gaining a better knowledge, a more full and complete understanding of one's surroundings. And it is from that line of thought and from that kind of experimentation that the Enlightenment era came into being. And let's face it, ladies and gentlemen, the Enlightenment era gave us the natural law philosophy that is the underpinning of our representative republic and, of course, of our foundational documents. Namely, and chief among those, being the supreme law of the land, which, pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, what is known in the common American vernacular as the Supremacy Clause, is none other than our shared United States Constitution. You see, when we keep these things in mind, it begins to make sense as to why the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists and their allies in the historical revisionists and Common Core standard bearers of disinformation are trying to eradicate that, are trying to teach that the history of the West is nothing but depravity, theft, and murder. Yet nothing could be further from the truth. This is identity politics, where they want to break up certain groups and praise them, while at the same time ignoring every foible and flaw and folly that might exist within their culture, and which definitely exists in their culture, because let's face it, humanity is not perfect. One simply cannot achieve perfection in this earthly mortal realm in which we live. That's just the nature of the human condition. It's the nature of the physical plane of existence. But this intellectually disingenuous drivel that has been accepted as a cornerstone of modern education is doing a grave disservice to the up-and-coming generations. And yes, if it stays on its current trajectory, even those generations which have yet to be born. We cannot ignore this, nor can we sit idly by and pretend that this isn't happening. It is happening. When I was in university, a decade ago almost, hard to believe it's been that long, ladies and gentlemen, things were bad. There was this cult of identity politics, and there really is no more apt term to describe what this nonsense and drivel really actually is. It's arbitrary and capricious in its nature, and it's designed to be dissentient and divisive. And the reason it is because, as we have oft-times reiterated on previous episodes of our state-of-the-art radio program, the tried and true, albeit threadbare, tactic and strategy that is a favorite of the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists is that of divide and conquer. They want to obfuscate the truth. They want to divide us. They want us to be distracted and pitted against one another. That way, they can work their foul magic, so to speak, of redefining who we are, both as a nation and people. Fundamentally transforming these United States of America away from being a constitutionally endowed federalist representative republic into some sort of frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist dystopia torn straight from the pages of an Orwellian nightmare. And I know that this may sound like a conspiracy theory on the surface, but it's not. We have seen it time and again in generation after successive generation, but we've seen it that it's exponentially accelerated since the time of the so-called countercultural revolution that gripped this nation back in the 1950s and 60s. And recall that it is from academia that we got things such as critical race theory, critical legal theory, critical history theory, all of these critical theories, which are just rebranded versions of the Frankfurt School's approach of cultural Marxism. They realized that in established first world nations, that it's going to be difficult for people to accept Marxism. Why should we give up the things that we work so hard to build? Why should we denigrate our own standard of living and quality of life just to reach for some sort of pedantic ideal that has no connotation or connection with reality? You see, there's no logical reason to do so. And thus, what they have to do is pervert culture. They have to make the people who are the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, turn against their culture, turn against their national heritage, character, spirit, but above all, identity. And in so doing, they can then begin to re-chart the future, and dare I say, the destiny of the nation. That is their underpinning motive. That is their end-all, be-all goal. And they will stop at nothing to achieve it. The frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists are, if nothing else, very meticulous, very methodical. They're patient. They have been working towards this in incessant fashion for well over a century and a half now, folks. And they're not about to stop because they believe they see a light at the end of the tunnel and that they think that that means that their victory is within grasp. So they're going to keep pushing for this. They're going to keep trying to pit American citizen against American citizen in the hopes that we tear out each other's jugulars, thereby bleeding this nation to the point of anemia. And there's something else that these dark, twisted, and, dare I say, nefarious forces fully comprehend and understand, and something that they are exploiting to their greatest advantage. And that is, remember that the old adage goes, knowledge is power. Or certainly, being able to control the avenues of which to attain and disseminate knowledge and learning is power. All one has to do is look at the annals of history to see that that is the case, and not American history. Let's look at the history of ancient Greece. Remember the Nicomachean ethics. The Nicomachean ethics, I believe that's what it was called. It's been a while. But it was about the trial of Socrates. Socrates, in the Greek democratic polis, and that word polis is where we get the word polity or politics from, had charged the great philosopher Socrates with corrupting the youth. Now, what Socrates was famous for was creating a system of education in which you question everything, thereby opening the avenue to make your own independent and personalized, individual viewpoint, opinions, and outlook. Now, the upper echelons of Athens felt that this was going to anger the gods, because yes, he even questioned their theology. And therefore, they charged him on trumped-up charges of corrupting the youth. Now, that is exactly what the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists are attempting to do. But ultimately, Socrates went about in this infamous Socratic method, a tool which is still used in law schools across this country to this very day to make fools out of those who were prosecuting him and interrogating him. And so they found him guilty of the charges of corrupting the youth of Athens, and they sentenced him to commit suicide by consuming poison hemlock. Again, this speaks to how knowledge is a fountain of power. And again, it was through Socrates' Academy and later Plato's Academy that our modern approach to learning was developed. It was a critical aspect of Western thought, culture, philosophy, and civilization. But this is not something that is limited to the West. We see that the Mandarin elites in China followed differing schools of thought. And of course, there were two main ones throughout Chinese history of great importance, that of Taoism and of Confucianism. But when they got into power and were able to exert their influence over the emperor of China, the various dynasties that existed, whenever one school of thought or philosophy came to power, they would attempt to annihilate their competing schools of philosophy or thought. The reason for this is they didn't want the competition. They didn't want there to be a way for their dominance and authority, which of course translates to power, to be questioned. That is the type of mentality that has been adopted by the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists and their allies in the historical revisionists and the Common Core standard bearers of disinformation. They are proactively seeking to undermine a competing mindset, a competing political philosophy, and to make everyone march lockstep towards their ideology come hell or high water. Now, is that a healthy environment? No. Because if you stop and think about it, if the purpose, as was developed from the academy system, developed originally by Socrates, then fleshed out by Plato and Aristotle, was about creating a well-rounded pupil, capable of thinking for him or herself, and the type of groupthink that has dominated the ivory towers of academia from coast to coast and border to border here in the land of the free and the home of the brave is completely antithetical to that. And in other words, it is attempting to create this collectivist mentality. And that's the thing. With cultural Marxism, they proactively seek to annihilate the ability of the individual to think or act for him or herself. Why? Well, if people are accountable for themselves, it means that the notion of the ownership of private property will remain secure. And that means that the people will not be receptive to their dark and twisted ideology and machinations. And therefore, they would reject it wholesale. Now, that's not something that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists are willing to acquiesce to or to bow down to. Stop and think about this for a moment, folks. Remember that dastardly notion of Cloward and Piven, the Cloward and Piven principle, came out of the annals of our ivory towers of academia back in the 1950s and 60s, at the height of the so-called countercultural revolution. They were the ones that sought to create or establish a permanent entitlement state to work in conjunction with this out-of-control Leviathan administrative state that was originally established by the father of the American progressive movement, Theodore Roosevelt, a Republican president, if you recall, to make this a permanent state. Essentially, what they wanted to do was to overwhelm the original safety nets that were created by government, something that is contradictory and contrary to the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution, or the supreme law of the land. And thereby, it would make the people lose faith in everything. And when they see that their pillars of society and what had become an accepted, new, and well-established norm was overwhelmed, they would crawl to the government on bended knee, begging essentially for the government who created this quagmire in the first place to resolve the problem, to cure the problem. Essentially, what they had done is they had taken away the rugged individual spirit that has defined these United States of America dating back to our inception, or conception, as a nation of people, and replaced it with this mindset that the government is some sort of an end-all be-all for the cornucopia and plethora of problems that we face both as a nation and people. That is their modus operandi. That is what they have been really in hyperdrive, for lack of a better term, to push for the establishment of in this fast-paced modern society in which we live today. Further distancing and divorcing ourselves from those great attributes that propelled this nation to such lofty heights in her relatively brief yet illustrious history here on the face of God's green earth. That is their goal. And that is what they've been pushing for, and that is what they continue to push for, and it is getting worse with each successive and passing generation. And so they think now is the perfect time to disregard primary sources, and to create a bunch of fluff, to try and redefine the political landscape and narrative of these United States of America, where we praise those like Roger Nash Baldwin, pardon me, folks, Roger Nash Baldwin, one of the co-founders of the so-called American Civil Liberties Union, or ACLU, who was infamous for uttering the words that we will use the Constitution in order to destroy the Constitution. This is the mindset that has dominated the so-called New Left for decades. And again, it shows no signs of improving within the foreseeable future. They see no reason to back down. They see no reason to admit that their dark and twisted machinations and ideology has failed each and every time that it has been attempted in the course of human events. And at the same time, they attempt to ignore the fact that these United States of America have the longest standing constitutional document throughout the entire course of human events. That means in all of world history, no other nation on the face of God's green earth has created as stable, as open, as honest, or as free a system of government as we have here in these United States of America. Folks, that is what true American exceptionalism is. And that is why all of these egghead academicians who are embracing historical revisionism, things like the hoax of man-made global warming, and the standard bearers for the Common Core standard of disinformation, they are promoting this. They are championing this type of drivel, and it is all designed to undermine the societal fabric and framework of the land of the free and the home of the brave. That is where we find ourselves as I sit here right now, speaking into this microphone, conveying this message unto you, our cherished listening passengers and audience members. You see, education is the path to which you can control the destiny of men and nations alike. And that is exactly what the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists have been working so meticulously and so diligently and so incessantly towards over the course of the past 150 plus years. And they do sense that there's blood in the water. They think the feeding frenzy of socialism and of their dark and twisted machinations is about to bear its ugly and poisonous fruit. It will be the poison pill that will destroy America from within. And make no bones about it, ladies and gentlemen, that is exactly what the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists have set as their end goal for all of this time. I know that I've recounted this story on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, but it is so on point that it bears repeating again here. Back when I was studying in undergrad, seeking to achieve a bachelor's degree in history, I had a professor swear that George Washington was essentially illiterate, that he was a cruel, white, slave-holding, sexist male who was wealthy and just wanted to perpetuate his wealth. Now, I challenged him. I pulled up the primary documents or sources that we have on the 7 Years' War, or as it's known in its American theater as the French and Indian War. I started reading the dispatch. I said, it's beautiful language. The syntax of it is just stunning. The alliteration in it, the entire flow of it, it was like classical prose. Wouldn't you agree? The professor totally unaware of who it was who had actually penned those miraculous words, agreed. I said, Professor, do you know who it was that authored that? Who it was that wrote that back in the 18th century? He said, No, I'm not. Who was it? I said, A man by the name of George Washington, the very man you just erroneously claimed was illiterate. You know, we just had the 4th of July, the 241st anniversary of the bold proclamation made by our founding fathers in their sagacity and near infinite wisdom and foresight to establish this independent nation with the revolutionary notion that we, as the people, are the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this republic. And if you look at the Declaration of Independence, which I covered in some depth and detail in my last Solo Flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program, you will see that the ideals that our founding fathers championed are timeless in their nature. This is because they are based upon the natural law tenets, which by their own nature are immutable, meaning they are just as applicable today as they were at the inception of this great nation some 237 plus years ago, with the ultimate ratification of the Constitution, as God willing they will be some 237 plus years from today, just as they are today. You see, this is what the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists don't want you to realize. This is what the historical revisionists and the Common Core standard bearers of disinformation don't want you to realize either. Because again, it empowers you in your capacity as United States citizens, but above all, and arguably most importantly of all, as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, to stand together, shoulder to shoulder, in solidarity and unity, and put your collective foot down and say enough is enough. Yes, there are times when a collective works, but a collective is strongest when it recognizes the sovereign rights of the individual. That is the reason why the United States of America is a constitutionally endowed federalist representative republic and not a democracy. Yet we see thrown around willy-nilly and most certainly in loose-knit fashion this erroneous claim that these United States of America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, is some sort of a direct democracy. No, a direct democracy is the type of system that goes forth and demands that a man like Socrates give up his fundamental and inalienable God-given right to life for allegedly corrupting the youth of Athens. You see, our founding fathers studied this stuff. They looked back at the history of Western culture and civilization and determined that a democracy would not work. In fact, as that wise and sagacious founding father Benjamin Franklin so aptly put it, he defined a democracy as two wolves and a lamb voting for what's for lunch. Liberty is a well-armed lamb contesting the vote. That's what it comes down to, ladies and gentlemen. It is the ability of we the people, in our capacity as United States citizens, to demand that these sorts of dastardly deeds that are occurring on college campuses from coast to coast and border to border come to a swift and, dare I say, immediate end. Because as I mentioned at the outset of today's Solo Flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program, this was all designed chiefly to undermine the societal fabric and framework of these United States of America. That is what their end goal and modus operandi has been for generation after successive generation now. And again, It is something that is not going to change within the foreseeable future unless we, in our capacity as United States citizens, take a more proactive role in getting the true history of the land of the free and the home of the brave out there, so that it is not lost, so that it does not fade from the annals of history, so that it does not become some quaint experiment of a bygone era. Because if you stop and think about it, the primary impetus behind our constitutionally endowed federalist representative republic is to be handed down to posterity. And we can see that that was the clear intent of our founding fathers in their near infinite wisdom, and certainly in their sagacity, in the beautiful poetic language that is contained within the four corners of the preamble to our shared United States Constitution. We the people do ordain and establish. That means we own it. But the most important attribute there is that one of the sacred purposes for which this country, this federalist representative republic, was created was to secure the blessings of liberty not only for ourselves, but also for our posterity. In other words, for the up-and-coming generations, and indeed those generations which have yet to be born. That is one of the fundamental, quintessential, and central attributes and aspects of who we are as a nation and people. But unfortunately, the way that modern academia is working, they're doing everything in their power to eradicate this from the collective memory of the United States of America, both as a nation and people. And they are not about to relent on that. They are not about to let up on that. Because again, they believe they see a light at the end of the tunnel, and that this means that their victory is within grasp. And unfortunately, that is something that is a dark and twisted thing that is only getting worse with each successive and passing day. These frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists are relentless. We know that from the Dewey system of education that they've been pushing very radically for this sort of collective moral relativism and politically correct drivel since the turn of the 20th century, at the very least. It actually goes back further than that. But ultimately, it falls on our shoulders to realize that this is occurring. And that is why the great visionary Zygmunt Dobbs attempted to warn about this in his magnum opus of Keynes at Harvard back in the 1950s and 60s. He said that the countercultural revolution was one that was primarily driven by cultural Marxism, this ideology, again, that arose from the Frankfurt School in the interwar periods between World War I and World War II. We didn't heed that warning. We allowed ourselves to become complacent. We allowed ourselves to fall into a false sense of security. Oh, well, that will never happen in the land of the free and the home of the brave. But as Ronald Reagan did put it so aptly, liberty and freedom is always just one generation away from extinction. And that's because the agent provocateurs of tyranny, despotism, but above all oppression never rest. They are nefarious. They are relentless. They are, if nothing else, meticulous, devious, and spiteful. That is what we, as a nation and people, must awaken to. We must stop burying our heads in the sand and denying that this sort of chicanery, this sort of fluff, this sort of drivel is occurring in our institutions of higher learning from coast to coast and border to border in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. It's undeniable. It's there, plain as day, for anyone who is examining this under the totality of the circumstances and with a modicum of objectivity to see for themselves. And think about it. We've seen all of the claims of these millennials being entitled. And oddly enough, I actually fall into the definitional category of millennial, but I certainly don't hold the outlook and point of view as the current generations that are in our institutions of higher education. I was a firebrand in college. I was constantly looking to challenge the professors because I took a classical approach to education. I thought it was about the embetterment of each of the students or pupils in their individual capacity. I did not buy into the groupthink or identity politics, which is essentially replacing self-accountability and self-responsibility, those two fundamental pillars that, when they work in tandem, give us self-determination, and saying that society made me do it because I belong to a certain group, and it's your fault because you belong to a certain group. That is called corruption by the color of blood, or corruption of blood. Guilt by association. These things have no place in an open, honest, but above all, free society like that of these United States of America. The frothing of the mouth, Fabian socialist leftists don't want you to know that. They don't want you to think about that. They don't want you to comprehend that because, again, it means that you have the ability to stand up to them. You have the ability to challenge them. You have the ability to stand up for that which is right. In a sense, what you do when you expand your breadth of knowledge and examine the totality of the circumstances in an objective fashion is you free yourself up to be the virtuous people that founding father Sam Adams said that we had to be in order to be a strong, robust, and vibrant republic. Again, all of this ties directly back to what it is that propelled this nation to such lofty heights throughout the course of our relatively brief yet illustrious history here on the face of God's green earth. There's no escaping that. But they will do anything to obfuscate the truth. They will do anything to bury the truth, to try and make us acquiesce to and accept this chicanery. And make no mistake about it, ladies and gentlemen, that is what this is. It is sheer, unadulterated chicanery designed to bamboozle the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this country. You see, George Orwell had it right with the Ministry of Disinformation. And think about what the communists have always referred to their gulags and various disciplinary institutions where they were re-education camps. You see, again, education plays a vital and pivotal role in the healthy sustenance of a nation and people alike. Culture and society can be manipulated by the narrative that is spun in the classroom. That is why the frothing of the mouth Fabian socialist leftists have been working so diligently, so meticulously, and dare I say, so incessantly towards redrafting the history of these United States of America. It is all done with the end goal and purpose and design of undermining all that we hold near and dear, both as a nation and people. And again, they are never going to relent from this. Therefore, it falls on our shoulders, in our capacity as United States citizens and popular sovereigns of these United States of America, to lampoon them, to make them appear as ridiculous as is humanly practicable and possible, because that will begin to undermine this clout of authority, this dominion of education that they have developed, and frees us up to expose the up and coming generations, and indeed those generations which have yet to be born, the real truth. And that's one of the things that we've always adhered to here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, that the light of truth always has a way of shining through, breaking through the web of deceit that these frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists, the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, the historical revisionists, and the Common Core standard bearers of disinformation have woven. We can pierce it with the unyielding and unbending light of truth, because that is the strongest, sharpest arrow in our quiver of arrows. It is what will lead us back onto the path to prosperity. But the only way that we can possibly hope to achieve this in any meaningful fashion is for us all to foster that fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared United States Constitution, and thereby our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. That is what it is going to take. It is going to take a concerted effort on the part of all of us in our capacity as United States citizens and popular sovereigns of these United States of America. Now, I fully realize that this is far easier said than done. And one of the things that the great visionary Zygmunt Dobbs pointed out in his magnum opus of Keynes at Harvard was that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists would throw out as many draconian and overzealous regulations as they possibly could to keep us downtrodden. They would try to hide their true malicious and ugly intent with rather innocuous sounding terms, fluff words that are both vague and ambiguous. They would engage in that dark and twisted game of semantics that we have been warning you about here since the airing of our premiere episode, which was on September 11th of 2015. And that they would do this so that we would lack the ability to keep abreast of the breakneck changes they were attempting to implement in the heart of the land of the free and the home of the brave. You see, it is very disingenuous what they've been doing for generation after successive generation now. And they are ratcheting up the tensions. They are trying to push this at an ever faster pace, drip by drip, increment by increment, pushing this nation ever further to the left. And we see the drastic and detrimental impact that this is having on the body politique of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. It is having a bad impact. People are beginning to look to the government as some sort of an end-all, be-all solution on both sides of the political aisle for every problem that we encounter, both as a nation and people. And that is intolerable and, dare I say, unacceptable. And it is all done in the name of something innocuous like social justice, political correctness, or moral relativism. You see, the left always sits there and tries to say, well, who the hell are you to say that you can state what is right and what is definitively wrong? It's a game. That is the game they play. It is dishonest. It is ugly. It is dark. It is twisted. But they've been fairly successful with it. They have managed to inch their way ever further into the inner working of these United States of America, and they damn sure are not about to quit at any time within the foreseeable future. This is their end game. This is their modus operandi. This is what they do. And yet so many of us sit there and say, well, then it's the education system itself that needs to be torn down. No. What needs to happen is that we call out the charlatans, the hucksters, the carnival barkers, the con artists, and the snake oil salesmen that are attempting to indoctrinate the up-and-coming generations of these United States of America. Then and only then can we marginalize them. Can we show them to be who they truly are? Now, they're going to use every propagandist tool to try and paint us as maniacal, as insane, as out of step with, here's one of their semantic magic buzzwords, opponents or deniers of progress. You see, they've honed this in until it's become a finely crafted art. And that's how they treat it. It is an art of deception. It is the art of death, depravity, decay, but above all, destruction. This is what the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists do. They do it each and every time. They always adhere to it. They never want to break away from it. And again, it traces its most precipitous evolution back to the countercultural or so-called countercultural revolution of the 1960s. 50 years ago, a half century ago, they have been peddling this nonsense and this drivel. And they have been replacing the classical notions of education, the classical input and impetus and purpose of education with this social engineering drivel, which is all designed to strip and deprive us in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty and as United States citizens of our fundamental and inalienable rights, which were endowed to us by our Creator, who happens to be none other than the God of nature himself. This is what the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists have been doing for well over 150 plus years now, ladies and gentlemen. This is what they live for. This has been what they strive for and yearn for at every waking hour. And it is truly dark, and it is truly wicked, and it is truly evil. And of course, with the way that our current system of education is going, and this intolerance of the left, while all facetiously shrouding themselves in this mantle of tolerance, they're engaging in whitewashing history. Look at what they do to Confederate things. They deny the history of that. In the city of Hollywood, Florida, they're changing street names, all because they're offensive. You see, the ministry of disinformation is alive and well in the heart of the land of the free and the home of the brave. And they are going to continue to peddle this nonsense time and again. And they are going to ratchet up the pressure. And they are going to step up their efforts. And they are going to increase the rate of speed because they loathe and despise all that has made this nation great. They don't want you to be accountable for yourself. They don't want you to be able to think and to act for yourself. They want you to bow down to an almighty, omnipotent, out-of-control leviathan of an administrative state that lacks any and all credibility and lacks any and all responsibility to the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty. They are attempting to marginalize you, me, and all of us as American citizens because they think they know better than we do. This is why the great French philosopher, historian, and admirer of America in her halcyon days, Alexis de Tocqueville said that anyone who champions this type of socialism is actually pushing for a soft despotism and a new age form of feudalism. Recall again that feudalism was that static caste system that existed at the time of the medieval period or the Middle Ages. You had those who fought and owned property, those who governed, essentially. You had the ecclesiastical order, and you had the peasants or the villeins. The original definition of the word villain meant landless serf. I know that I've mentioned that before. But again, when you take it in connection and in conjunction with all that is occurring within the ivory towers of academia from coast to coast and border to border in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours, you see that this is the true nefarious and insidious nature of these frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists. But let's take a recent example that has been occurring on college campuses across this country. But I want to focus in on one that I read about in a particular article from the College Fix that was put out on July 5th by Nathan Rubelk. And here's what it is. Happened in Fairfield, Connecticut. Serious explorations into race should focus on the problem of whiteness and be grounded in the claim that it's a hegemonic power apparatus, a Fairfield University professor suggested at a recent conference aimed at pushing radical social change in higher education. So right there, it already highlights the same type of language that the frothing of the mouth Fabian socialist leftists have utilized for well over a century and a half now, folks, and they are trying to push for what? The new age segregation? This is the intellectual disingenuousness that rests at the heart of the historical revisionists and of the Common Core standard bearers of disinformation. They're the ones that are attempting, again, to make it as though the individual choices of individual people shouldn't matter and that they should be tainted by the sins or the failings or the bad actions of certain groups at a certain period in history, which is long gone. Not about equality. It's not about equal opportunity. It is about engaging in this dark and twisted notion of identity politics. This is the cult of identity politics, attempting to bear down and lash out at our students to make certain students, based solely on the color of their skin, to feel ashamed, to feel inadequate, to feel as though they are the progenitors of every wicked, evil, vice, that exists within the human condition. But it goes on. The remarks from Associate Professor of Philosophy, Dr. Chris Seeley, who spoke about her strategies for discussing race in the classroom, were presented at and I love this, he's one of those buzzwords and one of those dark elements of that twisted game of semantics that we've been warning you about here at Radio Aviation Excellence. The Wright Flyer comes in Diversity Conference for employees of Jesuit College. In other words, what this conference was all about was how can we move forth in continuing to indoctrinate students who are enrolled at our university and at our institution. Folks, that's literally what this is. Not about the truth. It's not about solving the problem. No, this is about attempting to label people. You see, again, it is tried and true, albeit threadbare, tactic and strategy of divide and conquer being utilized by these frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists all over again, and it is infiltrating and infesting our institutions of higher learning from coast to coast and border to border in the land of the free and the home of the brave. It's disgusting. It's this sort of shame baiting, race baiting, intolerance that has made education turn away from uplifting the individual, providing a productive member of society who is a well-rounded member of society, into a name and blame game. This is why the safe spaces come up. This is why the drivel of political correctness and moral relativism reigns supreme in its once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. From its inception, it has been designed to weaken us. It has been designed to be divisive. It has been designed to divide and conquer. And that's what they're doing. That is what this little professor has set her mind to. It goes on. So more and more, the courses that I teach on race have become courses in which I expect my students to engage in the hegemonic power of whiteness, said Seeley, who's taught courses such as Black Lives Matter and critical race theory. Now, again, critical race theory, if you recall, ladies and gentlemen, is one of those cultural Marxist ideologies, cultural Marxist philosophies that came out of the Frankfurt School in the interwar periods between World War I and World War II. It's designed to be a propagandist course. It's designed to indoctrinate the up-and-coming generations in these United States of America. Again, with the end goal being completely undermining the societal fabric and framework of these United States of America. That's what the buzzwords are about. That's what the great visionary Zygmunt Dobbs was attempting to warn us about back in the 1950s and 60s in his magnum opus of Keynes at Harvard. Continues. Or rather, the article continues. Seeley, a scholar of color, whatever that means, said her approach toward teaching race has much to do with teaching at Fairfield University